Hi everyone, excuse this extremely brief and rather rushed video. It's yeah, uh, the best I'm going to be able to do at the moment. As you can see behind me, I'm filming from my rather private quarters here. Now, I have a lot to tell you, and it's a very complex story, so I'm just going to kind of skip around all over the place, and I've got to be very quick because I'm also running on limited data. So please forgive the quality of this presentation. Okay, about 25 years ago approximately, I got obsessed with the question as to what constitutes a completely ecologically and socially friendly and sustainable society. And to be honest, at first I didn't even really understand the question. It took me probably about a decade to really figure out what that question really means. And that gives you some indication as to the depth of thinking that I've put into this. And along the way I invented a range of different systems, from transport systems for internally inside a building versus long distance transport systems. I invented different water and power and wastewater recycling and management systems, and I studied a lot of engineering and sciences and so forth, including some law and politics over a period of about 8 years of tertiary study, and researched loads of things. After a few years of being into this whole thing of invention, and mind you, I hadn't actually put any of these inventions into the marketplace. My father, in fact, actually at this point took me along to church property, and given that I'm not even remotely religious, I jokingly made hissing sounds as my feet hit the church property because I'm walking in barefoot like a hippie. And anyway, so I walked in there and met a whole bunch of absolutely lovely people who ran a local community bartering group, which is under the title of LETS. LETS is an acronym that stands for Local Employment Trading System, sometimes Local Energy Transfer System, depending upon who you ask. But it was developed by a British-Canadian economist called Michael Linton. And so I read his thesis, and I read the LETS Group Designer's Manual, and I read a bunch of other information, and discovered that Michael had correctly identified a whole range of flaws within currency-based economics. But being an economist himself, he hadn't actually stepped outside of the scope of analysing currency from the perspective that maybe no form of any currency whatsoever is the best idea. And after a while of thinking, that's precisely the direction that I went. And the more and more I read in terms of things like, things that came up over the years, like the Venus Project with Jacques Fresco, and then when Peter Josephs later started the Zeitgeist movement, I read what other people were doing, and ultimately what I found was that a lot of people had great ideas as very general principles, but no idea as to exactly how to bring them about. And even when you talk to them about their ideas, you could very easily spot flaws in those ideas. My own personal background, aside from my tertiary study, is that I've actually done over 100 jobs in my life now. So you name the job and I've probably done it or something very much like it. And that's everything from the very bottom floor of cleaning toilets and sweeping streets and lifting sheep and picking fruit, and working in warehouses doing picking and packing and storeman duties, to being a rigger and scaffolder and audiovisual technician and staging hand across entertainment, demolition, construction, industrial maintenance, all the way through to retail, wholesale, direct sales, telemarketing, call centres, and even account management, relationship management, business development, sales training and sales management. So I've had a rather eclectic life, one might say, and it is precisely through this experience that I've gotten to the point where I can tell you what I'm basically going to tell you today, in brief. Most of which, though, you'll find in the text, simply because I really have to restrict this video to as short a time as possible, and I'm already realizing that the amount of data this is going to use is going to be huge. I'm currently suffering from spinal damage from everything dating back to childhood, where I had scoliosis, through to damage that was done as a rigger and scaffolder. So I'm very limited in my work options. Even sitting at a desk for long periods has basically brought back migraines that I hadn't had for over a decade. And for those of you who know migraines, you'll understand this this description, but for those of you who don't, it's basically like having a railway spike driven through your skull by a sledgehammer, and then somebody kicks the end of it for the next 12 to 72 hours. So trust me, you'd never want one. And I used to get these years ago to the point where I could do nothing. You know, dark rooms, painkillers, nothing touched it. You know, I actually, in fact, was in a similar situation recently, not just with migraines, but with other pain, where it was so intense that only a quadruple dose of a muscle relaxant put even the slightest dent into the pain, and I was told later that I should stop doing that because it would cause me liver damage if I kept going, or kidney damage, one of the two. Anyways, so here I am in a situation where basically I bugger all money. I live in a room temporarily which has rats in the walls and the ceilings with limited internet. And here I've had this 25-year obsession that I'm trying to get off the ground. So I need a lot of help for a lot of things. Part of it is just to get me into a stable position in life where I can afford the physical therapies that I need to keep myself out of pain, and to basically have whatever hope of rehabilitation of what's left of my spine is possible. I've applied for a disability pension, but apparently when your country has no science minister anymore, x-rays don't constitute evidence. So the Australian service provider for welfare has denied me a disability pension and is continuing to try to force me into situations that have got nothing to do with my own well-being or human rights. So if you could please read what I have to say below this about this major project of mine, which is, you could think of it as a conglomeration of interwoven sub-projects on top of a framework, the purpose of which is to basically cure our species of its insanity by fundamentally transforming the flawed foundations of civilization, which include our legal system, our representative government systems, and our currency-based economics. There are other flaws, of course, in society in terms of the way that we run pretty much everything. And that is pretty much self-evident if you look at the species extinction rate and the rest of the damage that we're doing, not only to other human beings, but to our own civilization, to every single ecosystem that we come into contact with. And assuming that you're not one of these insane right-wingers who basically be disagreeing with what I'm saying, what I'll tell you is that at some stage in the future, when I've got the funding to do so, I'll also produce videos which actually really break down the science of this stuff so that anybody can understand it. As you could imagine, putting a 25-year obsession into all these things effectively means that I haven't been paid for a lot of the things that I've been focusing on. I've done over 100 jobs, as I said, but many of those are really just kind of week-to-week jobs where you get enough money to pay your rent, buy your food, pay your bills, and that's it. You know, so I really desperately need your help. There's a lot of really important work that I've done, and what I would like to do is take this to the next stage where I can basically implement my 4-stage strategy. In brief, that 4-stage strategy is, the first stage is setting up an investment fund as what I call a bidirectionally translating interface between the external economic world and the internal world that I'm trying to build within this organizational structure, which is ultimately not based on currency. It will have to use currency at first, but down the track it basically provides more and more and more of its own needs without any use of currency whatsoever. Until the point where it can actually take over completely. But so that stage 1 is about setting up that interface via an investment fund so that we can deal with the expectations of the external market of currency-based economics and investor expectations without basically sabotaging the very things that we're actually trying to achieve in the first place. The second stage is then about setting up a data center, which is going to be the IT backbone of the entire business. So it provides services to itself, it provides services to the investment fund, and it also provides services to every other aspect of the organizational structure and every single sub-project that comes along from that point forward. Stage 3 is then about setting up the core research and development team, which involves a number of people that I've known for a number of years, some of whom I met at university, others I've actually known since childhood. And these are all really, really brilliant people who impress me no end, partly from their intelligence and their ethics, but mostly from their humility, because they are the most amazing people I've ever met, and I don't know if they really understand how amazing they are. So I basically want to be able to get to the point where I can hire them full-time, tell them to quit their day jobs, and they will basically work with me, amongst other things, in that core R&D team, which is basically a support team for every aspect of the project evolution and every sub-project. And that core team can be built on over time, and other people might be invited into that core team. And there is even the scope within this entire thing whereby entirely separate core teams can be set up in other countries around the world. The fourth stage is basically then a recursive stage. The purpose of stage 4, each instance of stage 4, is to support every subsequent sub-project. So whether that sub-project be bringing about a new part of the organisational structure, or whether it be bringing about new capabilities and functionality within the total organisation, or whether it be supporting a project which has been inserted into the system by a person that I haven't even met yet. It's all basically irrelevant, because ultimately what this is about taking any project from conception through to completion through a process which can be scientifically quantified and measured and verified, so that basically what you know is you have a project where the world has need of this thing for a start. Secondly, that the method of delivering that need is scientifically and technically valid. And third, we can then make it work in a resource allocation sense, which of course in the initial stages means a lot of translation through to the existing business world, but later down the track we won't have to justify things so much in terms of the way that the rest of the world presently works. So that's basically stage 4, is that you keep on implementing a new stage 4 every time a new sub-project requires it, whether that's for its initial launch or whether that be for later stage development of any sub-project which might be expanding and evolving. And all of the data and resources which are generated by every single part of this whole scheme throughout time ongoing is basically feeding back into the evolution and growth of this whole concept. So anyway, rather than try and upload any more data than this, I'll call it quits at that. This is really a first stage of funding for me, like a stage 0, just to basically help me get to the point where my life is stable and I can put forward all the things required to get to that stage 1. Because really at the moment right now, I'm struggling big time with pain and with instability in my life. What I want to do is get myself set up on a country property where I can basically grow food, work on my own health and healing, and focus on these projects, the planning, the funding and costing and logistics and everything else, so that I can present stage 1 effectively. In the meantime, probably doing other studies as well, so that I can make the best use of my time. So thank you very much for listening, and I really hope that you'll help me out. Thank you.